Come along now, Rachel. She turned to see her father and mother at the front door. She hurried up the steps, hoping her father hadn't noticed the commotion her half-brother had created. But her father glanced over her shoulder and asked, "What was the trouble with Vince? I didn't know he was back." Brad Franklin was attired in the dress uniform of a major in the Confederate Army, sword and all. His rather hungry-looking face was tense, as it usually was whenever Vince was around, and he shook his head angrily. Why did he come at all? Nothing brought as much humiliation to Brad Franklin as the sight of his eldest son. A product of Brad's first marriage, Vince was the image of his mother, Lila Crawford, and this alone was enough to stir painful memories. Lila had been as promiscuous and selfish as she had been pretty. But Brad had been young and in love. He had not discovered his wife's self-centered nature until after they were wed, and then it was too late. Brad had remained firm in his convictions after their marriage. He had refused to overlook Lila's flirtations and involvements, demanding that she become the wife she had promised in her vows to be. So it was less than a year after Vince's birth, Lila divorced her husband, took her baby, and ran away with a gambler from Natchez. All of Brad's attempts to reclaim his son had failed. He had seen Vince only a half-dozen times after Lila's departure, and never for more than a few moments. Then, 3 years after Brad's marriage to Amy Rocklin, they had received word of Lila's death. Hoping to be at last reunited with his son, he had taken 5-year-old Vince into his home, but by then the boy was totally spoiled and as selfish as his mother. It hadn't been long before Vince's half-brother and half-sister, and his father, had little to do with the boy. Now, staring with distaste in the direction Vince had gone, Brad shook his head again. "Oh, never mind, Father," Rachel said with a smile. She gave his collar a slight pull and said, "My, you look dashing, doesn't he, Mother? And look at you in that new dress." Amy Franklin, the only daughter of Thomas Rocklin, was not really a beautiful woman, but she made people think she was. She was tall and dark like her father, and her fine dark eyes were her best feature. She smiled indulgently at her daughter. "Nobody looks at old women at weddings, Rachel. Let's go take our seats before somebody else gets them." "Not much danger of that," Brad said, holding the door open and following the two women inside. "Sam Reed has got this wedding planned down to the last bouquet. I think you have to have a pass from him to even get in the church." An usher met them, saying, "This way, sir," and led them to their seats. When they were situated, Rachel said, "Isn't it lovely? I've never seen so many flowers." "Too bad the bride can't see them, isn't it?" Brad whispered. "She can smell them," Rachel said, "and she's gone over every one, I do think, touching them." "A strange thing for Dent to marry her," Rachel's father said thoughtfully. "We all thought it'd be that Yankee girl, Deborah Steele, walking down the aisle with that boy." He gave a restless shake to his shoulders, adding, "I guess Dent thought a blind woman wouldn't mind the way he looks with all the scars." Though he sounded cold, Major Franklin was merely voicing what many others had thought. Dent Rocklin had been one of the most handsome men in the city of Richmond, the object of many women's devotion. But a terrible saber cut on his face, which he had received at the Battle of Manassas, had left him with a ghastly scar. It was perhaps natural that some would leap to the conclusion that he would marry someone such as Amy Reed, who was lovely, but blind. Rachel shook her head firmly. "No, Daddy, it's not like that. They're really in love. I even heard Dent say that Ramey was the most wonderful gift God had ever given him. If I ever got a husband, I'd want him to love me as much as Dent loves Ramey." Then she said quickly, as if to cover up a slip, "But here I am, the spinster of Lindwood, talking about a husband just like all the old maids." "I wish you'd stop calling yourself that ridiculous name, Rachel." A quick flash of anger flared in Amy Franklin's eyes, and she added, "You could have been married long ago. There are a lot of